Yes, Roberto, we're recording. Yeah, well, they can edit this out. All right. Well, once again, good morning to all of you. Some of you I know, others I don't. So I would like to know who you are after the service. So don't leave until we have had a chance at least to shake your hand and get to know who you are this morning. I would like to speak a little bit this morning. In fact, this will be the beginning of a two-part message so that we'll begin this morning and then finish up next week on some aspects of the life of Jacob. Jacob. Now you remember Jacob. He is the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham. He is one of the patriarchs that we have there in the beginning portion of the Old Testament, still in the book of Genesis. You will remember all of that as we remember Jacob this morning. And specifically, I want to focus on different moments in his life. And this morning, like I said, it was the opening sermon, so we will only look at one moment. And then next week we will see two more as we round out this two-part message. But let me just speak quickly to what these moments are. The first moment that we will look at this morning is a moment that I call departure. Departure. And I am going to assimilate or link together the moments with age brackets in a person's life, but don't get me wrong, departure may and can happen in many different instances along our lives. It's not confined to only one moment. It's just a convenient way for us to think about some things. So this morning we will look at departure as it fits into the category of youth and or young adult. And some of you saying, yeah, those days are past for me. Well, I'm right in there with you. Don't worry. Again, like I said, it can be applied in different times of life. But just for us to get an idea of how we are breaking out the different moments of Jacob's life. So today we look at the theme of departure, specifically as it relates to the youth or young adult phase, and we'll get into that shortly. Next week we will look at two other moments in Jacob's life: arrival, which I equate with the adult phase, perhaps even middle age in terms of life, and then the final moment that we will look at also next week is what I call new beginnings or starting over, and I will equate that to the golden years of senior citizenry. So just for us to just understand kind of the way that I've broken out these things. Now, throughout each of these life phases, there are linking threads which kind of tie everything together. Obviously, the most obvious thread of connection is that of our own selves, right? Our own life. We are present if we make it all the way to that phase in every single one of these different phases. But I would like to focus in on one of the highlights, which is transition. Each one of these phases, departure, arrival, a new beginning, can all be characterized by the word transition. Moments of transition in the lives of each one of us. Now, transitions are very important in our lives for many different reasons. Two of these reasons are that first, they afford us opportunities. A moment of transition gives us a new opportunity in various different areas and sectors of our lives. It offers new perspectives. Oftentimes it offers us new doors of opportunity that we might walk through, either professionally, personally, relationally, whatever these are. There's just different areas in our lives which are afforded opportunities at moments of transition, which perhaps in other moments in our lives are not as easily attainable or available to us. They offer us times in which we can grow, an opportunity for growth, for development, both personally and professionally and otherwise. And the second thing that it offers us, among many other things, is also challenges. So on one hand, we have opportunities in moments of transition, and we also have challenges which crop up in moments of transition. These are problems and barriers and obstacles and things that must be worked out and worked through in moments of transition, because life happened in a certain way and we had already worked out most of the kinks. And then at a moment of transition, we have new challenges which crop up, and these things need to be looked at, examined, evaluated, and worked through. And these are the challenges which are common to all of us in moments of transition. And so we have both opportunities and transition. Now, this is the point really that I want to make in all of this, and that is, if we stumble during a moment of transition in our lives, what we need to understand is that if we choose a wrong path in a moment of transition, if we make an incorrect, erroneous decision in the moment of transition, every area of our life will necessarily be affected by those choices and those decisions. If we make a good decision, they will be affected in a positive way. But if we make a bad decision, they will be affected in a negative way. And those are things that we all live out in our own lives, but we have to be very attent. Obviously, not just in moments of transition, but especially in moments in transition, because the stakes seem to be a little higher when we face those moments in our lives. And until we are then able to identify those mistakes or missteps and go back and rectify them, or allow them to be rectified even by God, we will continue on an incorrect course. And of course, the outcome may be disastrous. And we obviously want to avoid that at all costs. And yet, sometimes we find ourselves living out the very reality of those things in our own lives. Well, like I said, the first transitional moment, going back now to Jacob's story, and we'll talk a little bit more about him now, is the moment in which we will call departure. Departure. Usually, in the life of a young person, as they move through youth into the young adult phase, and that varies from culture to culture. What does it mean to be a young adult? 20-something, in certain cultures, maybe even 30-something. I don't really worry about those different categories. They're important, but not for this purpose. But as we can all understand that phase, and then other phases in our lives where we may experience, not because of age, but because of other factors, a moment of departure. But what do I mean by departure? It's that moment, particularly in youth, where we have someone who is graduating from college, moving into the next phase of life. As a young adult, going into life, but maybe even packing up and moving out of home. Some people stay at home for college, some others leave home and go to college. I did that, but my son stayed, so there's different experiences. But as you move out into life, away from the harbor and protection of your parents' or your guardian's home, and moving out into life on your own for the first time, that is a moment of departure in which you are leaving and experiencing new things. Now, there may be other moments of departure along our life's journey, perhaps at a different phase, where you're not striking out for the first time, but you are entering into something brand new, and it feels like the first time. Of course, there's other factors that go along with it, but I think that you get really what I mean. This whole idea of departing into life for the first time and having to face life now squarely, without a covering of others that have kept you perhaps safe and protected and shielded somehow from the world around you. And these are moments of transition that happen in most of our lives as you have lived it, looking back, or some of you perhaps are living that moment or are yet to still enter into that phase. Jacob. Let's take a look at a little bit of aspects of his story before we apply this moment back into his life. You remember that Jacob, from the very moment that he was born, was locked into a struggle and a rivalry with his brother, his twin brother Esau. But since Jacob was born second, he was not the firstborn, Esau was. And there was a rivalry between them from day one. In fact, Jacob's name already kind of encapsulates his reaction to this rivalry. Since he came out of the room grasping the heel of his brother, he was named Jacob. And Jacob means supplanter, or he who holds the heel of. And it's the idea of wanting to pass over and take the place of and supplant his brother as the firstborn. And that gives us a clue then, from that point forward, the type of relationship which existed between Jacob and Esau, particularly in the first part of life, as they both lived together in their father's house, Isaac, and were jostling against each other, fighting for some sort of supremacy. And there was obviously several areas in which that might have manifested itself. But there was two particular areas as it related to the relationship with their father that kind of boiled to the surface, and in the story, as the biblical narrative will tell us, really came to the forefront in the beginning relationship between Jacob and his brother Esau. These two defining moments of the first years of their relationship, we can call, the first one is the birthright, and the second is the paternal blessing, or the final blessing given by their father. These are two pivotal moments in the life of the relationship between father and son, and or father and sons, and as it related then to the relationship of Jacob, Esau, and finally their father, Isaac. Now, both of these things, the birthright and the final parental or paternal blessing, that is, are somewhat together. If we take them together, they're somewhat akin to what we have today in our own life and times, a kind of a last will and testament that their father would leave for his son or sons, his progeny after him. But it went much deeper than a last will and testament as we have today. We have certain laws and regulations in our own society here, in our society here in Brazil, which regulate this. In other places, a last will and testament goes a little deeper, but it's even deeper than that. And let's take a look at these very quickly for us to understand what's going on here in the life of Jacob as it pertains to all of these things. So the birthright, very quickly. The birthright involved passing from father to son, and usually it was the firstborn. The birthright was the order of birth, and it was usually given to the firstborn, right? So the birthright was usually given to the firstborn, but not always. And the father was able to exercise his prerogative, and he was not compelled by any social mores or norm of his time to necessarily have to give the birthright to his firstborn son. It could be, and it might have been, to another son. And that happened years later. Jacob, now the father of 12 sons, did not give the birthright to his firstborn, Reuben, and instead chose to give that to his grandchildren through the part of Joseph. So it went to Manasseh and Ephraim, but Manasseh being the secondborn, he made him the firstborn. Interesting, but we won't get into all of that. That's just kind of an aside. So he chose to do that. Well, in the case here of Jacob and Esau and Isaac then, and particularly looking at the birthright was then something that was passed on between father and son at the time of the father's death. And what was passed on, it came into play at the time of death, but what was passed on were these things: rights and privileges and responsibilities from father to son, authority, the name of the father and the name of the family, and the authority that generated was passed to whomever the father chose as part of the birthright. The position, the inheritance, and all of these things were passed through the birthright from father to son. And so it was a big deal. It was a big deal. Now, it's important to note that you will remember that Jacob acted in a very opportunistic manner as he bought the birthright from his brother Esau. And we won't get into that story. You can read about it in Genesis. But just to mention the fact that Jacob then, he used his own astuteness, his own smarts, and his own manipulation of a situation to gain the birthright from his brother, who, in his own fault, also despised the birthright and sold it for something as simple as a plate of food. So we won't get into all of those ins and outs of that, but yet that's exactly what happened. And then we move to the second aspect, which is the final blessing, the final paternal blessing. And this was the second most important right between father and son as it was regulated by that society. And it too involved passing from father to son to the future generations, aspects of inheritance and wealth, but it also involved the father speaking words of blessing over the life of his child or children, and usually to children, in terms of setting up future lines of relationship and authority between the siblings, and establishing also prophetic words over them, which would speak into their future, what their lives would become based on all that the father knew in terms of their personality, their makeup, their gifts, their strength, their weaknesses, and obviously even empowered by God himself. Jacob, you remember, deceived his father and also received the blessing in the place of his brother Esau. And we won't recount all of those details. He goes in, he deceives his father, he receives the final blessing from his father. But what he did not know and he could not have anticipated is that his father had only one blessing to give. It was not normal. The father usually blessed each one of his children, and yet Isaac had chosen in his own heart to bless only one, and he thought that would be Jacob. And so everything that he had to offer in terms of a final blessing, he preferred at that moment when Jacob was there, not Esau. And so when Esau comes in to receive the blessing and finds out that this blessing has already been stolen through deception, he cries out, "Father, bless me too. Is there no blessing that you have reserved for me?" And his father says, "I have left nothing. I've given your brother everything. Not only full inheritance, but full authority over you. I've made him your ruler and your master. There's nothing left for you." And you can understand now, between Esau and Jacob, this mounting rivalry and tension, and it comes to the head at this point, after this second incident. And Esau, in no uncertain terms, vows to kill his own brother. And that's just not the venting of a frustration, of a frustrated heart. That was the very real intent of his heart. And so Rebekah, hearing this and going and speaking to Isaac, and says, "We need to send our son away because why should we be bereft of two sons, one through murder and the other through being condemned as a murderer?" And so Isaac calls his son to him. And you can open your Bibles with me now to Genesis chapter 28. Genesis chapter 28. And we can take a look very quickly at verses 1 and 2 here, just for us to kind of get the sense of where we're going beginning. Genesis 28, verse 1, "Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, 'You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother.'" So this was the mechanism that was used to have Jacob leave. So departure. So all of this is to bring us to the point of departure. Jacob is now leaving the protection of his father's home. And up until now, Jacob has lived life according to his own abilities. according to his own categories, according to his own way of thinking. He, of course, was instigated at times by his mother, but yet it's all been about a life living according to his own way of thinking, understanding, and doing. So Jacob is now leaving home with what often is the same approach to life that many of us and many youth have, not only today, but all throughout the history of mankind. When we are in certain age brackets of our lives, when we're just starting out, we start out full of dreams and anticipation and that yearning to get away from the dominance of authority figures at home so that we can live life according to our own terms. And I want to spread my wings in the first expression of liberty and the first expression of now I can live life on my own terms and go out and make it happen. And that's not uncommon. Perhaps that may not be your story, but perhaps it was or it is. I don't know. And this is the very first point of real transition for the lives of most of us, and certainly for the life of Jacob. In this frame, in this time of a person's life, it may be that because of the way that you were brought up, the instruction that you received either at home or from other elders in your life, it may be that you have good, firm convictions. It may be, not necessarily is, but it may be, or it may have been in your own life. But in the first moment of departure, even those convictions, good as they may be, are untested largely in your own life. They may have been tested by your parents. They may have been tested by others who sought to instill in you good principles and a good, solid biblical manner of thinking. But it's largely untested in your own life. You have not had the opportunity to test that in its fullness, perhaps certain moments, but not in its full breadth of how it will be tested when you begin to experience life on your own. The person then finds themselves in a position of instability in terms of what they believe and what they don't believe. And it is a crucial moment of transition. And it's at this point then, as Jacob is going, that God meets him in a dream. And we're here in Genesis chapter 28. I want you to pick up with me in verse 12 to 15, or actually a little further, 12 to 16, as you follow along as I read. And he, Jacob, dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven. The angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And all families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. So God repeats to Jacob the promises which he had already given to his grandfather Abraham, and then to his father Isaac, and now Jacob receives the same promise with the add-on at the end, I am with you, I will not forsake you, I will bring you back to this land until all has been accomplished of what I am promising, I will not leave you. And that does not mean that there was a point when God chose to leave Jacob. It means that was for the rest of his life. God would be with him. And the point that I want us to understand at this moment is that, first, God's promises are not rooted in our merit and our track record. When God promised to Jacob Not only the Abrahamic blessing and the promise that he had given, and Jacob now receives and carries that forward, but he also makes promises of his presence and of his goodness and of his provision and of his protection, of his sustenance from that point forward. And it's not based on who Jacob was and how he lived his life, because you'll remember up until that point, Jacob was not living under God's rule, but he was living according to his own heart's rule. And he did things according to his own way of thinking. And he finagled from his brother those things that might have been, should have been, could have been. And we won't get into all of the theology behind that. It's just to say that Jacob still had not walked with God in the manner that would have been most pleasing to God. And yet God meets him and says, these are promises, but they are conditional on you listening and following and obeying from this point forward. So God promises, but it's not the promise that says, lo, I am with you no matter if you reject me or whatnot. Well, God still walks with us to a certain point, and I don't know where that line of separation is. Only God can tell. But there's certain aspects of when God says, I will give you this and be that in your life, which are conditional on us saying yes to him. And that's the first moment of transition, not only in Jacob's life, but in our lives as well. Now, like I said, there may be other moments in your life that involve some sort of a departure moment, a moment in which God gives you promises, but promises which say, you have a choice to make. You have a choice. You can walk and live your life with me as your master, as your God. You can follow the paths that I outline for you and walk in accordance to my precepts and laws. And you can follow where I lead you, or you can choose to live your life apart from me, away from me, and out from under the benefits, the presence, the provision, and the protection which I am offering you by way of a promise. But the promise is conditional. It's very interesting to see Jacob's response. God meets him, God gives him this challenge of a promise. And just a few verses down, again, Genesis chapter 28, verses 20 and 21, you can follow along as I read. And Jacob responds, and it says, then Jacob made a vow, saying, get this, if, so he makes this a conditional statement, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come back, or so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then, he says, then the Lord shall be my God. You see, Jacob had not yet experienced God in the manner that now is being proposed before him. So he's not necessarily rejecting God. He comes back to God with a statement, if you promise, but if your promises come true, then you will be my God. And it's kind of this circular, reasoning. God says, if you obey me and if you follow me, then you have this. And Jacob says, well, if you give me this, then I will follow you. And where do the chips fall in this type of conversation? Because Jacob did not have this long history of walking with God. Oh, he knew all about God from his upbringing. And he had contact through many different areas and times in his life. And certainly his father and his mother taught him many things. But he did not have the experience of living life apart from them to be able to experience what does life look like now when it's just me or just me and God. And so Jacob, he takes a step in God's direction, but he still has things to learn. So we don't throw out this moment in Jacob's life. We understand that he does take a first step. And sometimes that's all that we can take, right? We take a first step. And God is, in his mercy and his grace, he's so good that he allows us to take that first step without condemning us. And he says, all right, come along. And as life develops from this point forward, there will be other things and other opportunities for you to learn. And those things we'll take a look at next week as we get back into this series in the life of Jacob. But I wanted just to take us this far this morning. Regardless of your age or your station in life this morning, perhaps you find yourself in a similar situation with God, in a moment of transition, in a moment of departure, in a moment of which God is saying, this is a choice. Either you can follow me or choose to live your life without me. It's a moment of departure in which you don't have a clear path laid ahead, but you do have a choice who you're going to rely on. And I hope that you would make the decision, even this morning, of understanding that we are given not only an opportunity to choose, but we're given the wonderful promise of God's presence, and then he will open the way before us, and that is the path that he has laid out for us, and it is the best possible path in all possible universes. Do you understand that? It's not just one choice in many that you can take and they all end up good. It is the only path that you can take to arrive at a wonderful place in your life. There is no second path, an alternate route to get to where you would like to eventually get to, which is an eternity with God and even a good place in this life. There is no other alternative. Now, I've already shared with you, and I won't do it again. I've tried the alternative. It doesn't work. And maybe some of you have as well. But if you've never tried anything and you're at that moment of life, I encourage you to look only to God and to allow him to guide and direct your steps. Would you bow with me in a word of prayer? Father, we thank you for your promises that are given to us, even though we do not deserve them. We do nothing to merit them, and yet you have given promises to us, and you then challenge us with the choice of choosing or not you. And my prayer is that myself and that every other one of my dear brothers and sisters here this morning, and those that hear these words later on, would choose you today, the moment of decision, that they would choose to follow you, and that you would then guide and direct our steps and our paths for your honor and for your glory. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.